Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John Dallin. It is May 9th, 2018, and we are now in part 3 of our interview with Dr. Roger Hendrix. We have talked about his early years in the church in Southern California. We've talked about his mission, his becoming a CES teacher and institute teacher, and eventually an institute director at University of Southern California. And we've spent a lot of time telling a lot of fun stories about his interactions with general authorities in the 70s and early 80s prior to leaving CES to become a management consultant, entrepreneur kind of guy. Now we're going to be talking about his ascent as a leader in the church, culminating in both his time as a mission president, but also afterwards, his ascent to even higher levels of responsibility within the church. So that's going to be kind of what this part 3 is about. And so, Roger, we're going to go back a little bit into the 70s. Talk about, you talked in episode 1 about loving the levels in the church and the emphasis on personal growth. And you loved, the YMCA and the swimming and anything that sort of challenged you to move to the next rung. Talk about how you ascended ultimately to the ranks of not only becoming a mission president, but eventually becoming a candidate for area authority and then being invited by Gordon B. Hinckley to serve on the Deseret Trust Company board of directors. Let's talk about your ascent in church leadership. And I don't know if bishop is the right place to start, but let's just talk about that for a bit.
Well, it was, I think it was a normal progression. Maybe I was a bit young at the time. And so my first assignment that I would consider kind of going up the ecclesiastical ladder would have been becoming a member of the High Council of the Long Beach East Stake. And again, that stake president was my seminary teacher, then my stake president, and stood up for me all along my journey in CES. And now he's kind of bringing me forward on the High Council. I loved him. I think he loved me. And so he gave me a chance to serve on the High Council. And that's where you start getting schooled in church government, and sometimes when to be quiet and when not to be quiet, and how to speak up, how not to speak up, and deference to authority. And so that was the start of that, and I was there for 2 years, moved into another stake, the Palos Verdes stake, because I was the institute director of the Los Angeles Harbor College at the time, and that was within the boundaries of the Palos Verdes stake. And so I moved in there, and after a couple of years, they asked me to be on the High Council there, and that would have been sort of a natural kind of thing, because I had so much contact with all the young people in the stakes in that surrounding area, that to have that input, I think that stake president, his name was Merrill Bickmore, appreciated that. So he called me to be on the stake High Council there, and from there, all of a sudden they are going to change the stake presidency. And so I was sort of a minor league player on the High Council there. And again, we were informed that we were to come up with 3 names, and I was like the next to the last. No, I was the last High Counselor. Now, I was the next to the last High Counselor called in. John Carmack at that time was a regional representative, and LeGrand Richards was the apostle. And so I came in, I gave my 3 names. It was very normal and natural. And the last guy called in was the newest member of the High Council, Keith Hilbig, who had just moved from the Pasadena stake, and he had been a bishop there. And he was with the law firm of Smith and Hilbig. And so he was junior to me. And then okay, now we get into Roger's really spiritual experiences. And so I'm going to step back in time here for a moment, because this is what I would consider profound spiritual experiences. So, a year and a half into being in this stake, I wasn't on the High Council. I had left Los Angeles Harbor College to USC, and I wanted to move again. I wanted to, I had a chance to buy a home, and my wife was ready to move, and so I had this really meaningful dream, and it was that we were meeting at the local college in the big auditorium, and that they were changing the stake presidency, and this was before the stake presidency was actually being changed, and that the second counselor in the stake presidency walked up the aisle, took me by the hand, took me up there, and sat me in that second counselor's place in the stake presidency. I woke up, and it was one of those dreams where you thought it really happened. And you're kind of disappointed when you wake up. That didn't really happen. That was more real than real. That was really real. And so I had that. I wrote that in my journal just as a profound dream. And then 2.5 years later, we get the call that there's going to be a change in the stake presidency. And so I give 3 names, and so I'm sitting in the afternoon session of stake priesthood leadership in stake conference, and John Carmack, the second counselor, his name was Kent Broadbent, comes to the side door, and he points to me, and he says, "Come here." And I knew immediately what was going to happen. I walk in there. There's Keith Hilbig, the junior member of the High Council. He's the stake president. John Stansel, who was a bishop at that time, another great scientist with the Jupiter Project, was the first counselor, and I was the second counselor. And I took Kid Broadbent's place. He was the second counselor, and I thought, now that's a meaningful coincidence, and with an emphasis on meaningful. To me, I counted that as a profound spiritual experience. It kind of told me not to leave, and I had it. I didn't plan it. And remember, I was geared to that kind of progression. That meant a lot to my identity as a person who had maybe grown up with a handicap and was always trying to prove himself. And so that's how I got into the stake presidency. And I was in the stake presidency for 7 years.
Let me ask you this. What types of traits or characteristics would you say men needed to exhibit to get called as bishop, to get called into stake presidencies, or on the stake high council? What was the game you were playing? And maybe you didn't think of it as a game at the time, but what were the personality traits that you saw being effective and that you maybe even tried to model? Or was it just all subconscious? And even so, what were the keys of ascension to the level of stake presidency?
Yeah, I think very diligent in your church calling, whatever the church calling was, full tithe payer, very important, and a church loyalist. I don't think that they appreciated real liberal guys like UCLA philosophy professors getting up there and reading, reading Nietzsche. And so I was progressive, I was liberal, but I was a CES guy. I was bringing kids in. I was paying my tithing. I was very dedicated to the programs of the church and to filling church positions. And I didn't much, come up with real deep questions that would be disturbing. And you would make your mistakes, but people are forgiving. What they're looking for is that dedication to your church calling, that loyalty. And I think maybe your desire to want to do this stuff, because after a while you begin to learn that you're spending a lot of hours, and you're doing certain types of things, and so it is a sacrifice, and you have to want to do that. You have to find meaning in that, and so that's what happened. That's the qualities I look for. When I was, when we were trying to find bishops and other members of the High Council, and sometimes you want to give people an opportunity. People who have been loyal in their callings for a lot of years, they might be in their 50s, they may not have had an opportunity to serve, and so you want to give them an opportunity to feel good and have those opportunities to serve on a high council or in a bishopric. But the last thing you want is a person to be in a bishopric who's not there on Sundays because he's traveling on vacations. And you want to be able to count on them being there, getting the sacrament meeting program, organized, not fighting with the bishop, that type of thing. So that's what I would say would be qualities I look for.
I'm sure that when you reach some of those levels of responsibility, you're given the impression that every calling is inspired and that you're going to walk into those positions maybe, and when you need to fill the relief society president or the primary president or stake high council position, that God will tell you who's to serve in each position. And then I'm sure for many, what you expect is very different from kind of how it really plays out in terms of how you're able to line up available people with the slots that you need to fill. Can you talk about how conscious it is in those positions about whether or not the callings that you extend, you perceive them to be of God and revelation versus sort of this hidden secret, like we just fill whoever, the positions are with whoever's available, realizing that it's not really God telling you who is in every position. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think with the question, you get at the core of personal revelation in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, what we consider inspiration and how it comes. Now, on the one hand, I told you about my profound dream. Well, I've only had 2 or 3 of those in my whole life. Those are unusual. On the other hand, one of the things that you do more than anything else in the church is you interview. You're interviewing for temple recommends. You're interviewing for worthiness. You're interviewing for callings. That's most of what you do. And so you, like anything else, you develop a feeling for things. If a person comes in and, on a temple recommend interview, if they say, no, we don't believe that Gordon B. Hinckley holds all the keys to the priesthood, Well, okay, so you have your little checklist. He may not be candidate for bishop. But usually they do say those things, but then you talk to him a little more, and you're just trying to get that feeling. Is this the right fit? And so pretty soon you do get a feel for it or a feeling. And I think that's what, in the main, church leadership means by following the Spirit. You work hard, you try to get a feeling, and work at it again, and meet the people, and practice, and then you do get a feeling. Well, Sister Jones may be better as primary president than Sister Smith. Why? You're putting all the things together. She might have the time. She might have the disposition. Again, she might have the desire. She may want to do this. And so you put those together, and that to me is what is part of what you mean by having the Spirit or having revelation about a person. Now, at other times, it can be very profound, like LeGrand Richards picking the junior member of the High Council, Keith Hilbig, who had just moved in 6 months previous to that, and it shocked everybody because nobody knew him. And so now LeGrand Richards, sometimes you get a big feeling, wow, this guy or this gal is what we want. And sometimes it's kind of out of the line of authority. It's a person in the congregation. And so that's how I worked it. I know what profound spiritual, meaningful experiences are, and I know the feeling you have to get when you work hard at it. And Dallin Oaks said as much when he said, when he was made an apostle and he had to go around and change stake presidents, he said you have to work at it, and you get in all the information, and then you get a sense of things. But on the other hand, that's also how we do things in the real world. Like a person who has good judgment at picking executives usually are the people who take the time, don't make gut decisions. They get as much information as they can, and then they go with that feeling.
And so as you start getting familiar with this process, do you believe as a stake presidency member or as a bishop that the Lord is guiding you? Do you have that perception of your own experience? Do you believe that it's revelation when you're extending those calls?
Yeah, you've got to feel good about it. You don't extend the call if you don't feel good about it. And if you don't feel good about it, it's probably not a good call. And there have been times when I haven't felt really that comfortable with extending a call, and sometimes it doesn't work out. So that's been my case. Now, there are times like when you're in a stake presidency and an issue comes up and you have heavy debate going back and forth with the counselors, which we often did. And then, like the stake president, in this instance, Keith Hilbig, would kind of stay out of the fray and would let us discuss. And then he would say, well, I'll tell you next stake presidency meeting what my decision is. And so he comes back next week and he says, this is my decision. And you say, that didn't go my way. And so in that instance, what you do is you then come into the next most important thing in church government, and that is supporting your leader. And so his decision would not be my decision, but I support him. And that's almost as important as receiving the revelation itself. And so sometimes it goes your way, sometimes it doesn't go your way, and then sometimes you're the one who makes the decision. And that's the feeling part of it. You got to feel right.
And do you believe that God is guiding you in that process? Because we've got a lot of, instances today with Sam Young and the Protect LDS Children movement where we're finding out that leaders, sometimes really, sexual abusers and really abusive people, are being called sometimes as bishop, or in the Joseph Bishop case as an MTC president. And it's causing us all, or sexual predators are protected and called to leadership in situations that put people in really vulnerable situations. So in modern times, it's really calling into question, for me and for many, to what extent are these leadership positions truly inspired? And so my question is just, when you're a bishop or a stake presidency member, are you believing that God is behind your decisions? Is that a conscious thing?
Yeah. Because we're taught that when you go through that and you make a decision, that God has sealed that or God has approved of that, and so that's what you believe, and that's how you feel. God has given me revelation or inspiration or a feeling, and plus I have the authority, I have the keys, and so I have the right to that revelation. I've done my work. I have a good feeling. Boom, I go with that. Now, does it work? Now, when a person is called, they have their agency. They can turn on you. They can turn on themselves. They can make mistakes. And do they? Yeah. And so what you do is, in the case of these new issues with sexual predators, the whole system wakes up. Whoa, we don't want that to happen again. And you start going through the systems and checking, how did we get this wrong? And so the system then becomes more enlivened. Sometimes it can get a little dull. You're not as sharp. You think you know. And with this guy who was the MTC president and who was the president of Weber State College and was a mission president, why was that not picked up sooner? Is it because people don't want to challenge a general authority who asked this guy to be a mission president? And so hence, you say, well, he knows what he's doing, or the issue is not big enough yet. It's still a marginal issue. So if the guy is the president of Weber State College, maybe he's flirting, maybe he's touching, and then maybe he's called to be the mission president. And so the person being touched is, because the issue is not in the forefront. We haven't developed a vocabulary, emotions, enough people coming together and saying this is wrong. Then that person doesn't say anything. It might be more natural to them, or they might not want to question a person in authority. And after all, we're in an authority-rich environment here. And then all of a sudden, the dam breaks loose. And then the system begins to check itself. Are you really sure about this guy? Have you checked this guy out? Are you familiar enough with him? Have you picked up on the cues? And so that's probably what we're going through right now with children being interviewed about sexual matters, which I don't feel comfortable with. And who's the MTC president?
Joseph Bishop.
Joseph Bishop. I mean, if that's true, and we have reason to believe that it is true, but we still have to gather more facts, and this thing has to go to trial, and et cetera. But let's say it is true. This guy having a little private chamber down in the bottom of the MTC, that's like a movie out of Pulp Fiction. and that you just don't think that happens. That's not in your ability to form an idea that could possibly happen at the MTC. Well, it looks like it did, and so what you do is you just scrub the heck out of the place. By scrubbing it, you ask new questions. The people have more training. They have to have more information, and because this is the issue of our times, and it really started with the Catholics, with the
Spotlight.
priests being pedophiles, and so sometimes I think that's how I'd answer that.
So, during those times, your years as bishop or in stake presidencies, stake high councils, would you have ever dealt with people reporting sexual abuse or physical abuse or child abuse? And if so, in the 70s and 80s, do you have memories of how that would have been handled, and how in a system like that, sometimes we could defend the abusers at the expense of the victims? Would you have any personal experience with that or not?
Well, let me give you an example. So there is the ward primary in one of our wards, and there is a woman who is called to be one of the teachers, and all of a sudden she starts being rough with the children. And so one of the other women brings this to the primary president's attention, which then goes to the bishop, and then goes to the stake primary president, and then goes to the counselor who works with that stake primary president, who in this case was myself. And so this sister is being rough with the children. Well, verify it, and if it's so, get her out. It's that easy. Verify it. Ask, but don't wait. You don't want little children mistreated. And so that was an example of how I was involved and how we handled it. And the next Sunday, she was removed. Now, did she get mad? Was she upset? Yes. But that's another issue. Why did you release me? What right do you have? Are you accusing me of? And so in those instances, if you err, you err on the side of just being straightforward. You're being rough with the kids.
So how do you foresee it then happening, where either a victim, let's just say a victim of a woman who's a victim of spousal abuse, or a young teen who's a victim of sexual abuse, where either the victim by a priesthood leader is told to just keep it quiet or to repent, or worst case, an abuser is not punished and is even allowed to have future callings of responsibility where other vulnerable women or children or even boys are put at risk. How do you conceive of that happening in the church? Because it looks like it's happened many, many, many times. Can you give us insight into how that would happen? Because it sounds like that's not how you ran things.
During my period of time of leadership service, we didn't have that much stuff come to us. As a bishop, I didn't have that much stuff coming to me. But now it's coming. And back when I was a father with young kids, I've got to admit that maybe parents were more likely to spank. Maybe they were more likely to use gruffer language. Now we're far more sensitive to that type of thing. You don't own a child you have a responsibility for a child. You can't physically endanger them. You have to work out new strategies. Now, I'm not so sure back when my children were growing up that was the tour de force. That was what we were all talking about. It was, how do we get our children to read the scriptures type of thing, and that's what we were focused on. But now it's a different ball game, and we now realize there are legal ramifications, and if you rough up a kid, or if you violate a kid or you touch a kid, it's not going to go higher in the priesthood ranks and then keep it quiet. That thing's going to go to law enforcement. You're going to be put in jail. You're going to be charged. And so
it sounds like a lot of that abuse that now we're talking about maybe just wasn't on the radar of people in the 70s and 80s. Either people weren't comfortable reporting it, or it just wasn't on the radar.
One, I don't think it was on the radar. And until you see it, you don't see it. And
certainly it was happening.
It has always been happening.
Yeah.
And so, you brought up the example where the bishop will, if the husband is beating the kids or beating the wife, and the wife comes in and complains to the bishop, and the bishop says, well, our task is to keep families together forever. So you call the father and, hey, don't hit your wife. Well, nowadays the bishop bears responsibility not only ecclesiastically, but legally. I mean, you can't let that go on. If you know that a child or a woman is being violated, you've got to act post haste on that. There is no tolerance for that. Now, did we know of kids that were being roughed up by their dads back then? Yeah. And you would subtly mention to the dad, hey, it might be better if you kind of just calm down here a little bit. But it did not become a cause célèbre.
Okay. Anything else you want to talk about in terms of your service on the ward or stake level prior to us talking about your being called as a mission president?
No, I think that has it.
Okay.
Unless you want to know more.
No, it's good. So how does someone become called? What year were you called as a mission president?
I was approached in 1990 and left in 1992.
Okay. So how did someone become a mission president in this church? You can talk about your experience, but I also want to talk about it just generally. Who gets that call and how does it happen? What are the types of people that get called, or the types of scenarios where someone gets to ascend to that level?
Good question. So let's probe it a little bit. I think the general authorities are always on the lookout for people they feel might be a good mission president, and I think that's one of their assignments. Hey, do you feel this guy might be a good mission president? And you never say it. You're just in a stake conference that, somebody comes to your attention. Hey, I like this guy. And you put his name in, and then the name is put into a file, and then you go through a rigorous process of being filtered and vetted. And that's what happened to me. After I was a bishop for a couple years, I was in public communications for Southern California. I was director of public communications for Southern California. And this one general authority, Cook was his last name, I picked him up at the airport and drove him to an event. And I popped open the trunk of my car, and he was with his wife, and I was putting the luggage in, and I moved over a newly minted portrait of my family, my 5 children, my wife, myself, all dressed in our blazers, looking beautiful, looking very formally beautiful. And he said, "Oh, is that your family? Yeah, yeah. Oh, you had that? That's so." He says, "I've got to do that with my family," and that's all I said. And we had a good time. We talked. He asked me questions, and then the next thing I know, 4 or 5 months later, I get a call from Rich Scott, and he wants to meet with me. But he doesn't want to meet with me in a church building. He wants to meet with me close to where he's at a state conference. And
So this is your former mission president.
yeah.
So is there a chance that part of the formula was he knew you as a missionary?
What he told me was that they put a file on they put a bunch of files on the table, which means your name is at least put in that file. And I think that General Authority Elder Cook put my name in a file. The file was created. And so there are a bunch of files on the table. An apostle now takes over who has to do the initial interviews, and he sees Roger Hendrix. Oh, Roger Hendrix, I remember him. He's one of my missionaries. So he takes the file. He calls me. I think it's for lunch, and I can't do lunch. And his secretary has to call me back and say, well, it's a little more than lunch. And so we meet at a park on a Sunday afternoon. And he comes in the smallest little compact car I've ever seen. He was never one for show. He was a modest dresser. And so he gets out of this little car.
He's an apostle by this point.
He's an apostle. Only apostles now, or at the point I was being made a mission president, would interview these candidates to be a mission president. And so my wife is with me. We're in a late model luxury car, materialist that I am after I leave CES. And
No more springs coming out of the seats.
no more springs coming out of the seats. That's right. Yeah.
Because you had gone on to have a successful business career after CES, right?
Yeah.
That might be an important part of this equation is you became kind of wealthier or successful financially. Is that part of the formula?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know about that, but we made from 1983 to 1990, that was a particular economic period where there was a lot of money in the system, and guys like myself were filling out contracts to do consulting for major banks, and there was we had saved a lot of money. So anyway, my wife and I are in this car. Elder Scott gets in the back. He gets in the back on the driver's side, and so my wife can see him, but I have to turn my neck and never do get a full view or shot of him. And he gives the most convoluted question I think I've ever received. And it was, now, this is kind of like a date. I'm not going to ask you on a date, but if I were to ask you on a date, would you be ready to go on a date? And then he mentioned a mission president. And so, and you can name the time, he said. Maybe it would be 2 years, maybe 5 years, maybe a year, whatever. And so he says, I'm kind of thinking 18 months or June of 1992. And my wife said, I think that would be cool. And then he says, well, Roger, what do you think? I said, well, I like the 5-year idea, and
Because you're having fun, making money, being successful.
yeah, I'm really enjoying that.
And you're in Southern California.
And in Southern California, and I'm playing the Eagles all the time, driving in the fast lane, and I think I'm cool.
You're a
and,
Lakers fan at this point?
oh, a big Lakers fan, Showtime, and so I'm having fun. It's a good time. It's a good time for my kids. Let's see, where am I? So I can't see him, but I say the 5-year would be good. My wife says 18 months, June 92. He says, well, that's what I was kind of thinking of, and then he just disappears. Don't hear from him for a year. Now, and when we do see him, we're in a reception line to see him in his home, because it's a returned missionaries reunion with him. So we go to that, and he says, oh, Roger, climbs over a couch, goes to his bedroom, and says, I'd like to see you, next Monday if you can. It's a Friday. I'd like to see you next Monday after General Conference weekend. Say, okay. So we see him, and he says, it's highly likely, it's highly probable, he says, you're going to receive a call. Is there anything that you can tell me that would hold this thing up? No, there's not. And then
I have to imagine that as a general authority, the last thing you want to do is say the Lord has called you, blah, 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 and then to have the recipient of the call say, oh, actually, I've got this thing, or my wife's sick, and so they want to get all the information they can so that when the call is extended, it's received as a call from God versus like, I know God wanted this, and I know you're in touch with God, but that's not going to work for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They would want to avoid that.
I think the hardest calls to get right are mission president calls, because you're taking them out of commission for 3 years.
Their job, their career, their livelihood, right?
Yeah. And it's really more like 4 years, because, you have to cut your client load down and give them to your clients to someone else and get ready. And then you come back and you have huge withdrawals after the mission. And it takes you about a year to get your sea legs. So they've got to get this one right. And they're talking with my stake president, 2 and 3 times, and they're talking to the CES people. And they say, well,
like a background check, like the CIA, right? Or the FBI, right?
Yeah, and the CES people says, we haven't seen this guy in almost 9 years. He left. And so they're just, they're doing their due diligence. And once you come, is there anything? No. And it's high probability, you're probably going to go at this time. But don't tell anybody. And we still don't know. There's still that tiny chance. And that's
but the Lord doesn't want this.
This is kind of like murder. This is kind of like torture, and then I'm in Seattle, Washington at Cairo Radio and TV, where I'm doing some consulting, and then the secretary comes in and says, there's a phone call for you. And I go into a room, and President Hinckley's on the other line, and he says,
Hinckley?
Yeah. And he says...
And was he prophet by this point?
He's first counselor, I think.
Okay, so Benson's still president.
Yeah.
Hunter.
94, wasn't it 94?
I'm not sure.
Okay. I don't think he...
Okay.
I think Brother Benson is I can't tell you whether he is... No, he is not president. He's first counselor. So he says, well, hi, Roger. Hi. And he says, are you in the Cairo building? Because the church owns that property. And I said, yeah. And he says, I know what room, little office you're in. I said, yeah. He says, that's the one I sit in because I'm chairman of the board of Cairo Inc. And he says, now, you're a management consultant. How many consultants do you have? And I says, well, it depends on the project. And he said, do you think you can afford this? And, oh, yeah, I think so, And he said, well, you're called. But don't tell anybody because we want it to come out in the church news. So you still can't tell anybody. Then it finally comes out in the church news, and then it comes out in the church news, but then you meet President Hinckley and Brother Haight again at one of the Bonneville parties down in Southern California, and they, Brother Hinckley.
What's a Bonneville party?
Well, the church owns Bonneville, and Bonneville owns many radio stations and several TV stations. And so they get together once a year for their conference. And at that particular time, it was down in San Diego, and I just received a call from Brother Hinckley. And so he comes up to me, he says, well, congratulations, Roger, and but I can't tell you where you're going. So you're strung out until finally you get your assignment, and it's Santiago South Mission, Chile Santiago South Mission, and boom, 6 months later, you're gone, and you're there, and it starts very quickly, and that's how I was called.
So I don't know if this is true for you, but I think, so many Mormon men aspire to be bishops or stake presidents or in stake presidencies or bishoprics. It seems like the mission president is kind of a next level. Did you perceive it as such? What was that like to get the call, especially someone who advancement was like core to your faith, right?
To my identity.
Your identity and your church.
My sense of worth. Now, there has only been one time in my life where I wasn't ready for that type of church assignment, and that was being a mission president. So that was taking me by surprise, and I love being a management consultant. I love building the practice, what it meant, what I was doing, the life I was leading, and I really didn't want to be a mission president. But
you didn't want to be a mission president?
No.
So you weren't aspiring to that?
That was the only thing I wasn't aspiring to in my life. That's... but it's coming. And so I could have said 5 years. I could have said no, but I said yes. So there, obedience. Mission president. Wow, 3 years. So I had mixed emotions, but the emotions fell on the side of duty, obedience. I'm being called by the president of the church or by the apostle, by the first presidency. So that's heavy. You think you would speak up and be forceful in the presence of the first presidency. You kind of shrink, wow, who am I to say no? So I said yes.
Does the thought cross your mind, oh my gosh, this is a step closer to becoming a general authority? Would that have crossed your mind, like I could become a general authority or even apostle someday? Would that thought have crossed your mind at that point?
Not at that point.
What?
Not at that point.
Why not?
Because I didn't want to be a mission president to begin with.
Okay.
And I was liking the secular life.
But did you want to become a general authority or an apostle at that point?
No.
Oh, no.
No. See, I'd crossed the divide. When I was in CES, and you went up to be in the stake presidency, you have those thoughts. But then you get out into the secular world, and I was out there for 9 years. I enjoyed it. I was on the radio. I didn't want to leave that. I loved doing that.
Were you breaking any of the commandments that an Orthodox Mormon, are you willing to share that? Well, at that point, would you have been breaking any of the commandments that an Orthodox Mormon wouldn't break?
You should be a reporter at CNN. Hey, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to.
No, you don't.
But
you talk about the world.
Are you a sinner?
You talk about eagles.
Yeah.
You talk about life in the fast lane, secular world.
Yeah.
Would your orthodoxy have become laxed?
You do become more understanding. You don't make that sharp division between us and them. And you find out that the people out in the world, they're like the people in the church. And people in business who are doing well in business, usually they're pretty straight shooters. You've got to be honest. You can't cheat people in business. You can't be a scoundrel. And if you're a scoundrel, people usually don't want to do business with you because you don't pay your bills. So, there was no sin out there to commit. Now, I did drink 2 or 3 times near beer.
No, that doesn't count.
So I'm worldly, and even then, I drink world. Did anybody from the States see me? Forget that I'm across country, and no,
Okay.
I'm a pretty straight shooter.
Okay, all right. So you don't want the call, but you get the call and you accept it.
Yeah.
So what do you want to share about what it's like being a mission president? How's mission president training? How is that?
They give you a week in Provo, where you have almost every apostle and every member of the First Presidency, and all of the guys from the missionary committee just talking to you and telling you how it is. You break up into small groups, and they take you through the lessons, what your mission should be learning, and you have a week of that, and then you're out there. You have a 2-day transition with the mission president whose place you're taking. And now, I don't want to say being a mission president was easy for me, but I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it because there's probably no position in the church at that time where there was more freedom and more resources to do something than being a mission president. And all of a sudden you realize that, and you don't have general authorities breathing down your back. You don't have them calling you up. At least in the beginning, and every ward you go to, every stake president you go to, you're kind of the king of the hill there. And so all of a sudden it dawns on you, I have a lot of resources. Now what do I want to do? And so you decide on what you want to do, and you go about doing it, and you have people who will do what you ask them to do. They're in Latin America, or at least in Santiago, Chile, the mission president, you don't want to go up against a mission president. And or they did, at least they didn't want to go up against me, or I didn't feel they did, or I didn't know the language well enough even when they did. So even though I spoke it. So once you decide on the direction you want to go, you can put, as a result of being a management consultant, it was pretty easy to put processes in place and just start going with it. This idea that there were a lot of problems with missionaries, no. Where missionaries get into trouble, especially 19 to 21-year-old young men, is if they don't have enough work. And so my big thing was get out on the street. Get out. I'm not going to check up on what time you get up, because I know that your best teaching time is 10 p.m. forward. But get out on the street and just talk with people. And I don't care if you're a scriptorian, memorize those lessons, know those lessons, and just start speaking in the language of the gospel. And I won't ask you how many baptisms you have, but we're going to create stakes. That was my big thing. And I had a general authority area president who was, we just got together on that, and we created a bunch of stakes. That meant we had to activate a bunch of men, 18 years of age and over, and we had to baptize a lot of men. and we had to get them through and into the Melchizedek priesthood to be able to form stakes and new wards and high councils and new bishoprics and new relief society presidents. And once a kid is working, they're okay. It's when they're not working that it's like a person being retired. You have time on your hands, and so you start thinking about dumb things, or you think about things you wouldn't normally think about.
So during this time, so I served in 88 to 90, and those who have followed Mormon Stories will know that things were crazy in Latin America during the late 80s. So in Guatemala, we got up to 750 baptisms a month, I think. There were some companionships doing up to 40 baptisms a month, some zones with like 128 baptisms a month. But then we knew about Chile, and we knew that Viña del Mar mission had over 1,000. And I think we interviewed someone recently, I think it was Andrew Jolly, who said that his mission in Chile got up to like 1,400. And so and I know that became controversial while I was still on my mission from 88 to 90, because I remember Richard G. Scott and even Elder Ballard coming to our mission and implementing these rules that were like, don't baptize someone until they've had all 6 discussions, or make sure they've come to church twice before. So you had these crazy, and again, I'll just, for those who haven't heard, in my mission, it was soccer baptisms where like zone leaders would take kids out, play soccer with them, get them hot, and then take them back to the chapel and baptize 10 kids at a time, never going to church. Their parents didn't know, didn't have testimonies. It was just a numbers game. And in Chile, Viña del Mar, it would be beach baptisms where they'd go out to the beach and have parties and then baptize a bunch of people. You'd hear about missionaries taking names off of tombstones, which never made sense to me, and just making up fictitious names about who they would baptize. And if you want to go to a really important Mormon Stories episode, go to the Ted Lyon episode. He served as a mission president in Chile, and he talks about how when Elder Holland ended up living, I think, 3 years in Chile, he ended up closing over 30 stakes while he was there as a way to clean up the mess of all these fraudulent baptisms that were happening. Elder Oaks did the same thing in the Philippines during about the same time, lived 3 years in the Philippines cleaning up the over baptisms. And I remember personally talking to Jeff Holland about this, Elder Holland, and him saying it was a huge embarrassment for the church in Chile, where people were even protesting at the doors of the area offices in Chile from their kids getting baptized without their consent. Wards had 20 people, no priesthood leadership. And so they were just expanding the wards and stakes based on the members of record, but there wasn't the priesthood leadership to support these wards. So how much of that stuff were you aware of as a mission president in 92, 93? Because it had just happened all over Chile and Latin America in the 5 to 10 years prior. How much were you aware of that? And how much of that was area authority pressure? And what, if you knew about that, how did it affect how you were a mission president?
First of all, you were in the Guatemala mission?
Guatemala North with Gordon Romney from 88 to 90. Yeah.
Okay. Never heard about anything in Guatemala. Never heard about anything from Viña del Mar except the rumor mill, and that's all I heard. Now, it's not that I want to be careful, but I don't want to become defensive. I will just tell you what I did, and we'll take it from there.
So you weren't aware of egregious violations of baptism quality when you became a mission president?
No.
Okay.
No,
or
no.
Even the baseball baptism stuff of the early 60s?
I was aware of that.
Okay.
Okay. But remember, I went to Santiago in the 90s.
Right.
So
yeah.
That
was history for you, ancient history for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I'd heard of Viña del Mar where a few missionaries baptized 7-year-olds. And so, I looked into it spoke to the president, the new president of the Viña del Mar mission, and he says, the only thing I can find is that there were 3 or 4 that did that, and it was cut off. So you have to be careful what you take with you, because people sometimes are fed up with the church, and so they'll go with small stories and make them bigger. Now, with respect to my time in Santiago, Chile, it was from 92 to 95. I never asked for a missionary's baptisms. I never put a name with the number of baptisms. They all had to make personal goals, and I never interrupted their personal goals. And then I started out, you whatever you do, be with the bishops. Do whatever they want you to do. And the second thing was, as I started looking at the records, I started saying we could make stakes, and give people opportunity for activity, which spoke well of the mission presidents who came before me. And so I talked to the area president, who is Lynn Mickelson, and I said, let's create some stakes. And he had already said, that's what I'm here for. And so I was interested in baptizing families. I didn't want to baptize 7-year-olds, and I checked the baptismal records every week, and I didn't want that. And why would they if their names don't go on a list? And I don't even know how many baptisms a missionary does. But what I'm interested in is how many men 18 years of age and over were baptized. And when I felt that we were going under a particular number that I was shooting for, which was 16% of our total baptism should be men 18 years of age and over, then I would let up on the gas a little bit and then emphasize men, and then missionaries will go out and do what you ask them to do. And so there were 9 stakes and 2 districts when we came into the mission. And when I left, there were 22 stakes and 1 district. Now, for the Elder Holland stories that he had to close down 30 stakes, well, he didn't do it in my mission. Let me tell you, there was 1 stake that is closed in all that time. So I don't know where he's closed those things down. But they weren't in my mission, and I feel very strongly about that. And for several reasons. One, close to 1,000 young men and women came through the mission. I want them to treasure that experience above all other experiences. I don't want them to feel guilty that an apostle went down there and closed down all their hard work. I want it on the record. Only 1 stake was closed, and that's it. And we worked hard at that, worked with the general authorities, and I want those missionaries to know that they not only read history, they made history, and they baptized men who became priesthood leaders and women who became Relief Society presidents. Now, were there, was it problemless in the mission? No. If it was problemless, they'd never have a mission president. But, you have your typical problems. But I didn't feel like I had a lot of problems. When we did have problems, they ranged on a continuum from serious to not so serious. So you take each situation as it comes, and you have to be very careful when you're working with young people, anybody. When you're a mission president in this instance, you know that the least little bit of information, if it's contrary to the flow of things, it gets into, and missionaries talk about it, it goes like wildfire. Like one time, Michael Jackson came to town, the rock star. And so my kids wanted to go to see Michael Jackson. So we painted a great big banner. We love Michael Jackson. It was a huge banner. It was like 14 feet long and 4 feet high. And I asked the assistants to the president to help us. And so we went to the concert for Michael Jackson. And then all of a sudden, the very next day, Latin America has what are called these avenue papers that people sell them on the street corners. And the next morning, lo and behold, on the front page, Mormon Jefe at Michael Jackson concert, and it shows me, my wife, my kids, and the assistants to the president. And so, boom, that's like wildfire. You see the mission president doing that, you're going to go to concerts, and they're always having concerts down there. And so you had to be very careful. Now, I had to tell the missionaries, I'm two things. I'm a mission president and I'm a father. My kids want to go see Michael Jackson. You're a missionary. My kids aren't missionaries. I'm a father. I'm taking them. But I don't want you at concerts. And I don't want you using me as an excuse why you go to concert. And you just become very direct. And you don't speak in multisyllabic terms. You don't use a lot of scriptures. You just, boom. You just tell them like it is, and they respect that. And then you cut that off. And, is that the biggest problem I've ever had? Well, I had some other problems, but on the whole, a 19 to 20-year-old young man or young women from the western part of the United States especially, these are good kids, and they usually just come in and, what do you want me to do? And once you're clear on what you want them to do, they do it. And that's it. Now, when I was a mission president, you had to interview every single missionary once every 4 weeks. Well, at one point we had 252 missionaries. I couldn't do it, so it was once every 6 weeks. But when I was a missionary, I saw my mission president maybe 3 or 4 times. In my particular area of the country, maybe once or twice. And now missionaries are being interviewed every month or every 6 weeks, and you have a little booklet. You sit down with every missionary on a one-on-one, and you're doing this every single day for 3 years. That's what you do. You interview. So you have this booklet, you have a picture, you know where they've served, you know approximately how long they have served in what particular area, and you interview elder, sister, any problems? Are you worthy? What problems do you have? And on one missionary you might find him just popping out with acne, so you make sure that he gets to the doctor to get the right medication for acne infection. And so you don't wait, you just do it, and you don't question it, and you interview. And
Do you get sick of it?
yeah, did I get sick of it? You're worn out in 3 years of interviewing, but you have to make sure that you stay fresh for the interviews. And if the missionaries feel that you're just going through the motions, they'll let you know. It gets back to you, and so, but you have no choice. That's your responsibility as mission president. You interview these kids and these folks, and I don't try to go too deep in the interviews. I don't ask them about masturbation.
You didn't ask your missionaries about masturbation?
No.
Why weren't you the masturbation policeman?
if they came to, two missionaries came to me in 3 years and said they had problems with masturbation. So, okay, let's talk about it. What do you want to do about it? Well, I don't want to masturbate. Okay, don't. Want more? And I didn't want to. That's about how it was. And well, there it is.
So, a lot of times, or at least in my experience, mission presidents are viewed as like these spiritual giants, and they have a lot of power. And I remember my mission president, Gordon Romney, sometimes doing that same thing that I think you said Elder Hinckley did to you, kind of like that stare at you, pull you close, stare into your eyes as if they're reading your soul. And it can be, even if there's no abuse of power, it can be a really significant power dynamic. I mean, mission offices hold the missionary's passport. Like, you really are a captive person to the mission president and his decisions. That's in the most extreme cases. But then just day to day, they're kind of like your conduit to God in many ways. Did you ever get a sense for how large you may have loomed on the spiritual eyes of your missionaries?
Yeah, that's assuming that I was a spiritual giant. And
you don't think your missionaries perceived you that way?
Well, I think some of them did. I was interested that they worked hard, and if that came across as not being a spiritual giant, that didn't much bother me. I wanted every missionary to complete a full mission. I wanted them out there working, and we would build the kingdom, and we'd create stakes, and we'd fill the chapels.
Got it. You're a builder.
Building. Always building.
How did you handle big transgressions? Missionaries having sex, missionaries committing adultery, missionaries abusing, just the big stuff.
So 6 months in, I said, I'm not going to hold any more courts.
You were holding courts?
Yeah, you have. You hold a mission court on a missionary
To excommunicate him?
to hold a court, a disciplinary court. Yeah.
And when you held those, what was that like for you that led to you not wanting to do it anymore?
I'd been through too many courts, and I just had.
What was wrong with them?
Well, they usually didn't work.
Meaning what?
You're supposed to discipline the person so that they will repent and come back to the church. And a lot of times these folks didn't come back in the church, and I lost my taste for it.
You just found it distasteful and ineffective.
Yes, Anderson Cooper. Are you leading me with questions?
No.
Here? I think it's very difficult for a human being to get up in front of a high council of 12 guys, and then a stake presidency of 3, and then a clerk, and then go through a torturous 3 hours explaining your situation, not really any questions coming from the high counselors, which it should be, and then the stake president basically knowing that they wouldn't hold a high council court if they weren't going to issue a disciplinary decision. And so I didn't like it. And so when I got out in the mission, I had to discipline a couple of missionaries, and then I just promised myself I'm not going to do this anymore.
So how would you handle a sexual transgression after that point?
I called the missionary department and said, I'm not going to be holding any more courts. Do what you have to do. And they said, well, go work with your area president. So I called the area president, Mickelson, and I said, I'm not going to hold any more courts. He said, and he just said, great. You and I can solve any problem that comes up. I loved him. And so, well, if you can, good. Because back when I was a mission president, if a kid went home, it was tantamount to a tag on him, especially in this valley. There's a tag
Scarlet
on him
letter.
for the rest of his life, and the parents suffer. And I just used my judgment that I didn't want to do that anymore. Now, the moment I said, wouldn't you know it, the moment I said I'm not going to hold any more courts, then there is a big violation. And so my rule was a court, a disciplinary council on a missionary is the very, 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 very last thing. And maybe we can transfer him or her to a different mission or whatever, but I don't want to send a kid home. I want him to fulfill the full mission. And then, wouldn't you know, a big one would come across. And so you create principles, you realize that there are exceptions. And so there were a couple of exceptions, and I had to handle those. I did, and was that a lot? No, that was the minor part of the mission we held. The rest of them was interviewing and then holding zone conferences and then working with priesthood leaders. We got to a point where when it was verging on 22 stakes, we were meeting with stake presidencies 4 and 5 nights out of the week, because I want to meet with them once a month, and I want to go over all the baptisms. I want them to know where they are in the ward, and so you're out there all the time at night. Church work is night work, and so you're meeting with priesthood leaders, you're interviewing, you're in zone conferences, you're filling out papers to work with the area president to create a stake, and we only had one stake close.
So just one quick follow-up, and then I have a couple other questions about that. Would there have been missionaries who had sex on their missions under you who did not get sent home?
Well, I'm not going to answer that.
Okay. All right. Got it. How was it on your marriage and on your role as a father to be a mission president and to be gone all these evenings and to be working as hard as you were? How did you balance that with being a husband and father?
Well, other than taking my kids to see Michael Jackson.
So you're having fun with your kids?
Yeah, we had the biggest pool in the city, biggest private pool in the city.
Nice house?
7,500, 8,000 square foot Tudor.
That's huge.
Oh, we lived well, and we lived in Embassy Row. So, the ambassador from Taiwan would be driving out, you'd wave, hey, and then our kids would go to a party with the ambassador, the Spanish ambassador. That's a privilege and an honor and a perk that is cool. And your kids, they argue about going there and then they don't want to go home. And all of a sudden it dawns on your kids, this is privilege. This is cool. You're picked up by a Mercedes bus. You're driven to a private school. Part of the private school has mountains in the back. You can ride ponies, up there. You get cool athletics, cool academics, cool kids. And so they realize that it's an honor. So they're not pressing you. They're having fun. And I had one child who was having maybe a little too much fun. But the Chileans, when they knew that I was worried about one of my children, they would they would just come up, relax, Presidente, just he's just a kid. And Santiago is like Disneyland for kids up to 18. They know how to handle kids. And but once they turn 18, boom, there is just this automatic transition from being a child and a teenager to being an adult, and you are held accountable. But up to that point, a worship service is a wild thing, because babies are running up and down and on the podium and back and forth, and it's loud. And at first you think, well, this is our fault because we haven't taught them well. And then all of a sudden you realize this is Chilean culture. They love their kids. They're not hard on their kids. They give them their head on things, and then the kids have fun. They stay out late at night. On the weekends, they don't get in till 3 or 4 o'clock. They sleep all day Sunday and go to school. And then when they're 18, boom, they're off to their particular college or their trade school, and it works. And that is Latin culture. That's a power of Latin culture. You don't hear a lot of, you don't hear a lot of disruption from Latin countries. We think we do, but it's a tranquilo, cool, good food culture.
What about your marriage during that time?
Whoa, my marriage, good marriage.
During that time as a mission president?
Yeah, you mean, did we have marital bliss, or did we want to get divorced?
No, I'm just saying, were you neglecting your wife? Were you guys closer than ever? Like, what's being a mission president like on the health and strength of your marriage?
When we got down there, my wife didn't know how to speak Spanish, and the third day she was there, she had to drive the mission van and buy the groceries in Spanish, and I was a jerk not to be with her. And I was a priesthood leader. I had to be out in my meetings, but she cooked, and we had cooks there that helped her. And then all of a sudden, she's driving big 12-passenger vans all over the place, and then she becomes a member of the American Association down there, and she chooses within our mission boundaries to help an order of Catholic priests who go into cities where there is high mental retardation for one reason or another. They take old buildings, they refurbish them, they get people to help them to pay for it. And so my wife worked with a guy by the name of Padre Antonio. It's an order of priests out of Rome, and they do this all over the world. And they built this beautiful school and this beautiful living area for kids who'll probably be there until they die. And so my wife arranged to have food brought to them, especially fresh fish, sea bass to these little kids, and milk for the rest of their lives, and beds. My wife furnished beds, working with the American Association, and washing machines, and that was my wife. My wife is cool that way, and she loved that, and I loved her for that. And we were in zone conferences together, and she took half the time, and I took half the time, and marital bliss followed until the Donald Trump election.
Okay. And to what extent, what was the role of your area president? Was he pressuring you? Was he wanting numbers or not?
No.
Okay.
Now, one time we baptized 1,000 people. Once the missionaries get a hunger for that, and they know that the people have to go to church twice, we're not into kiddie baptisms, you're holding them back. They're going for it. They're loving it. And in some of these barrios down in Latin America, you go in there, and the missionaries are still rock stars there. So they know everybody. They get close to people, and plus, with Lynn Mickelson, you get audited, and so every 6 months, there's a general authority who comes in and audits all these baptisms you had. Just randomly take us to family X, Y, and Z, and I want to hear them, and so you're being audited, and the audit is not at the same time, and so I'm a big believer in audits, and I like being audited, and one time we were in a particular neighborhood where there was Lynn Mickelson, myself, the missionaries in that area, the mission van, and there was and it was dirt roads, and you know how it is, narrow streets, but the roads are dirt, not paved, and it's like a Sunday afternoon, and there's music blaring, and Elder Mickelson is auditing, about 6 families in that particular area. And then they start coming out into the streets. And it got to a point where we were so crowded we couldn't move with people around us. And now that was spiritual. They just did that extemporaneously. And we were just driving down that road. And we didn't get done until midnight. And I love those experiences. I love Latin culture at night. I love it especially in the summer. And I love the music. I love the food. I like being on the streets. And because there's always music billowing out, there are people on the porches. Nothing like Latin culture.
Did the mission presidency do anything for your testimony? Or were you just on testimony autopilot from that early institute experience? Did it bolster your testimony? Did it just not affect it? Did it strengthen it? Did it weaken it? Anything?
Yeah, yeah. Now, I didn't want to be a mission president, but you get into this thing and you get in the swing of this, and your whole life is enveloped in this, and you say, oh, I'd love to have this continue. And then that old feeling of wanting to progress comes back. And so you fight that. And that's it. Now, the spiritual experience. When I was administrator in CES, I didn't like doing that. I don't know that I was that good at it, but I was doing it. And then I felt like I was kind of a failure. And so one day I got my lawnmower out, was mowing my lawn, push mower, not a power mower. I was third row in mowing, and a voice outside of my head came to me, boom. And Roger, I'm greater than, the highest mountains. Can I open up oceans? And I would, in my mind, I'd say, yeah, you can. And he said, then, can I make your life meaningful? Just chill out. I'll make you as great as this guy and that guy. And then I kind of came to, and I was standing up on the lawnmower, and the voice was outside of my head, and it wasn't like the dream, it was like the voice. And remember, the first one was the stake presidency, and then this one was just a voice. And the next thing I knew, I was being asked by a broadcast executive to give a lecture to his broadcast executives. And then the next thing I know, I'm on the radio. Then the next thing I know, I'm being introduced to the president of what is now Bank of America. And then I'm offered a contract that is worth more money than I could possibly imagine. And so I had to make that decision, stay in CS or go. And I left. And it was like, that spiritual experience was like, it was like being outside of my body and just seeing these things transpire. And so I was going with it as opposed to causing it. It was like the California Adventure ride. You know, you see it, and you're flying over it, but you're not causing it to happen. You're flying along with it, and that was overwhelming. That as much as anything changed my life, and then from that took me out of CES and into management consulting, and then at that point I believed in spiritual experiences. I didn't mess around with that. Now my spiritual
That experience wasn't on your mission as a mission president.
No.
Okay, that was before.
But I got in the habit of when I was under stress to ask, and then a voice inside of me. It was like I was carrying on a conversation, and that took place all during my mission, you know, as a mission president. And it wasn't about other missionaries. It wasn't about leading the mission. It was if I was under stress, I would ask for a little comfort, and there would be the voice inside of my head, and I would have a dialogue with myself. Now later on, I said, what the, you know, I got to the point where I loved doing that so much that I felt like I was withdrawing from society. It's beautiful to have a dialogue with yourself. And so
Were you thinking of that as God?
The
Holy Ghost at the time?
I always called it the voice.
Okay.
I wasn't interested in starting a new religion. I was just interested in me. I was interested in my progress. These were all personal to me. Nobody could take those away from me. Nobody could say that I was this or that. It was for me, my relief, my progress, and I'm big on that. And so, but it got to a point where I said, one of the dialogues I had with the voice inside my head said, well, now, Roger, when are you going to think on your own? You know, and so I stopped having that internal dialogue and started being really rational. That was when I went into my golden age of rationality and loving philosophers, and couldn't get enough of how brilliant Nietzsche was, and George Hegel. How can these humans just be so brilliant?
But that wouldn't have happened as a mission president.
No.
That was after.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I wouldn't have these internal dialogues about a missionary. It was my own stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. And I took 6,000 pages of diary notes on that. So my spiritual life, to me, was strong. And I didn't I didn't kid around with that, but I didn't talk to people like it. It's mine. But then, as I got back in the world, I had to be more rational, and then I started studying what am I really experiencing. Then I've gone through different phases of what was that really, that internal voice, or that voice on the outside, and I went, well, it's self-talk.
We'll get there.
Oh, you.
But right now we're at the point of your
mission president.
Yeah.
I did what I did as a bishop. I did what I did when I was in the stake presidency. I worked hard, gained all the information I could, interviewed, got feelings, went with it, and that was it.
And two last questions, and then we'll wrap up this segment. Do you feel like the LDS Church made a positive influence in Chileans' lives as you saw it? Do you feel like the church was a good thing for these Chilean people who joined it?
Yeah, not all, but there's a certain kind of Chilean that just loves the Mormon way, loves the church, and they flourished under it, but not all. I mean, we probably have a 20% activity rate down there, maybe not even that. But for those who are full tithe payers, those who dedicate their lives, those who are willing to go through it, they would defend it with their lives. And you have a strong Chilean community of guys who have been area authorities and stake presidents who've moved up this area, and they're very tight-knit, very spiffy people. And but you know, when I'm asked about Chile, they said, well, there's a lot of inactivity. I said, and there's a lot of activity. Well, they're only 20%, but they're 20%. You know, you're talking big numbers. You're talking a lot of people. Now, they have shuttered 30 chapels, but you're talking about a country, you know, that is longer than California coastline, and yeah, how many Chileans? 16 million Chileans there. We're doing that. We did our thing, and are there people inactive? Are people inactive? We'll get into this the next time, but there will always be inactive people. Do I believe? I mean, you know, the thing that is cool now is that the church education system has pathways for kids where they can get a degree from BYU Idaho, I think it is, a Chilean who can go to institute, become a part of a group of 6 to 8 to 10 kids, and work up and become proficient in English, and eventually get a degree from BYU Idaho. That's, you know, that to people down in Chile, that's like graduating with a double PhD from Cambridge. I mean, that talks. That is what is the miracle. But there's a certain person that really takes to it. Not all people take to it.
Got it. Just 10 seconds on what was the criteria for calling a missionary to his own or AP? What were the important? You can just list 5 traits of what made someone caliber of zone leader or AP for you.
Let's start with an AP. They had to get along with my children. That was the first one, because I wanted them close to my children. Number 2, they had to be mellow. They couldn't get real excitable. And 3, they had to get all their work done by 3 o'clock because they had their own area where they proselyted. Everybody proselyted. Everybody taught. You know, so you don't tell people how to do it. You do it. And if a missionary's having a problem at the AP, I say, the AP, don't go in there. Have them come in where you're doing your proselyting, or proselytizing, as they call it now. And so they had to be pretty mellow. They had to be good with my children. They had to be workhorses. That was for the APs. For the zone leaders, the zone leaders had to be really tough, because I didn't want them going into another elder's area and telling them what to do. Bring them into yours. And when there were new missionaries, I always signed the new missionaries to the zone leaders. The zone leader would say, "You have us doing too much." Well, you don't have to be a zone leader. I want you to train these kids, and I want you to be the best example, and I want you to make goals with them, and I want you to work really hard. And so my deepest preference was for larger zones and zone leaders that could take a lot. And I didn't like co-zone leaders, because co-zone leaders are always blaming each other for the issues. And so one zone leader, big zones, when you have zone conferences, bring in 2 or 3 zones. Let's have it be big, and let's have desserts. And my wife would take half and have birthdays, celebrate birthdays, and I'd be out, of course, interviewing. Then I'd do my thing, and my thing was, let's have walking stakes. You know, if our members don't have cars, let's build wards where they can just walk to their wards. And if you have a low attendance rate, like during the winter, and it's a muddy road and it's not paved, and it's muddy, and you have 3 kids, and you have to take 2 micros to get there, give me a break. That's why a lot of them don't go to church, especially in the winter. And most of the time we don't have warm chapels, and they're cold. We expect a lot out of them, but they're pioneers. And so, don't bug me about these folks. They're giving everything they have, and I support them. If I had any other place to live, I'd live down there.
So you got called not wanting to be a mission president as you came home after serving for 3 years. Were you glad you did it?
Oh, yeah. And my kids were glad I did it. And my wife was glad we did it. And the only ones that kind of hurt were the kids that were in college. Like, I had a daughter who, she was a freshman in college, and we just sent her off to be a freshman in college, and then we took off to Chile, and we didn't see her. You know, she came down a couple of times. I feel bad about that, and I should feel bad about that. I should have taken greater care of her, but I'm very close to her right now. I'm very close to her children, my grandchildren, and that's the one thing. So that area authority thing, do you want to get in that right now?
No, we're going to wrap this up. Which area authority thing?
You introduced me as...
Oh, we'll get there. Really quickly, how were you compensated financially as a mission president?
But the first half of the mission, you don't get compensated. And then what they did was they had budgets the second half. Budget what your needs are. Even, taking your kids on a vacation. And so the first half, I spent my own dough. The second half, they supplied the budget there. But remember, when you move into a home that's paid for, you're
living like a king.
You're living like a king. They don't like you to say that, but it was cool living. And you have 6 office missionaries who are waiting on you night and day. You have mission vans and cars, and all that's paid for. So what you're paying for is your personal life.
But your food's paid for.
I don't know. Okay. Can't remember.
Okay.
But the second half, you had a budget, and they honored the budget. And the budget would be, like for us, I remember our first budget was like $30,000, and that's it.
A year. Okay. So not some stipend where you're bringing home a lot of money.
No. You have to. No.
Okay. All right. Well, this concludes part 3 of our interview with Roger Hendrix. It's been so fun to hear in depth what it's like to be a mission president in South America. We've got a lot to cover. We hope you guys have been enjoying this level of detail. I sure am. And join us for part 4, where we talk about Roger and his flirtation with becoming an area authority / general authority, or at least the opportunity that was presented. We're also going to talk about his being called by Gordon B. Hinckley to serve on the Deseret Trust Company, the board of that, for 18 years. And then we're going to talk about his faith journey and how that's ended. So much more to come. We hope you're enjoying this wonderful time with Roger Hendrix.